Hello and welcome to today's event. I'm Juliet. I'm one of the newest members of the Vitality Coaches team, and I'm very happy to be hosting today's event on gut health. As you know, we're going to be covering that very exciting topic, and we're also going to be touching on an introduction to the process of fermentation, specifically lactic fermentation. So I'm very happy today to be joined by the lovely Holly Dunn. Hi Holly, how are you?
I'm very good, thanks Juliet. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. It's lovely to have you. Holly is a clinical nutritionist. She's an expert and a speaker, and she's going to answer all of our wonderful gut health questions today. So before we start, I've got a few housekeeping things just to mention. So thank you, first of all, for registering for this event and joining us today. It's wonderful to have you. And thank you for those of you that registered any questions when you signed up for the event. I've got a long list here, and we really appreciate those questions. I think it's turned this session into a bit of a Q&A with Holly, which is perfect, exactly what we were going for. If you didn't submit a question before, or if you think of another as we're going along, you'll see on the right-hand side of your screens, there's a little question mark. If you click on that, you can submit a question to us there, and we can get that answered for you. We've got Jamie in the background, behind the scenes, monitoring those questions, and he's sending them to me right here on another little laptop I've got in front of me. So hopefully we won't miss any, and we'll get through as many as we possibly can. You also notice there's a handout section there on the right hand side. That's also got details of the rest of our events that we're running for the rest of the month, so make sure you have a look there. And without further ado, I think maybe let's get started. So Holly, gut health. Now, when I was preparing for this event, I read a statistic that I thought was really interesting, which said that 4 in 10 adults are experiencing digestive symptoms, at least one digestive symptom at any given time. So whether that's bloating, gas, constipation, etc. So that's a lot of people experiencing these sorts of symptoms, and yet it's still quite a taboo topic, isn't it? It's not something we kind of talk about very much. So I think it's something that clearly a lot of people are interested in learning more about. But perhaps a good place to start is, what's really going on in the gut, because it is quite a complex sort of ecosystem of its own, isn't it, really? Maybe you could just give us a little introduction into sort of what's going on in there.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. And I think, I didn't know that statistic actually, so I'd be really interested to know where you found that, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. And I think when we're talking about gut health, we tend to obviously think about the classical gut-related symptoms, which I'm sure we'll touch on. But your gut is essentially a muscular tube that runs from your mouth all the way through to the other end, to your anus. But it's not just involved in the digestion and absorption of nutrients, which is what we would, most of us are probably aware that that's what our gut is responsible for. So in terms of our gut health, we're thinking about, our ability to digest and absorb nutrients effectively, which involves, the production of hydrochloric acid and enzymes and bile and things like that. But our gut is also responsible for things like the synthesis of vitamins, specifically the bacteria, which is appropriate for today in terms of what we're going to talk about. But some of our bacteria actually produce B vitamins and things like K2 for us. Our gut is actually also the very foundations of our immunity. So when we're talking about our gut, we're also talking about our immune system. 70% of your immune cells are housed in the gut. So, it's an extraordinary, it's not just related to food and digestion, it's very much linked to our immunity. And I think the other key thing, and there are many others, but just to focus on the other key area, the gut is so involved in our mental health. The gut cells and the brain cells actually evolved from the same cells in the embryo. And they're connected by a really powerful bidirectional nerve system. So the brain communicates with the gut communicates with the brain, and actually over 90% of our serotonin receptors, and serotonin is a happy hormone, it's associated with well-being, those are located in the gut. We produce, it's absolutely mind-blowing.
It is.
Yeah.
I think this is the thing. There's so much to get your head around, but it also starts to. It all makes sense, doesn't it? Really, because especially in terms of like immunity and stuff. It's obviously the body's first line of defense, isn't it? When you're putting stuff into your body.
Yeah.
One of the biggest questions, we had this question a lot in the run up to the event, was around, I guess, confusion over, because we hear a lot about bacteria, good bacteria, don't we, and how we can introduce it into our diets to help keep our gut healthy. I guess we're talking about probiotics here, but I, for one, am somebody who just never really knew about the science behind that. So could we talk a little bit about what does that mean? Should we be introducing good bacteria into our diet? And what do we mean by good bacteria?
Yeah, so, well, our guts obviously are full of microbes, not just bacteria, viruses, yeasts, other parasites potentially, but predominantly bacteria. And we talk about good bacteria as being essentially commensal bacteria. These bacteria aren't harmful to us, and they actually do us huge amounts of benefits. Our gut bacteria communicate with our immune system. They make neurotransmitters for us. They make short chain fatty acids, which are really important for, again, our brain chemistry and the health of the lining of the gut. They can help us with our metabolism, how well we store fats. So they're very involved in body composition. They help protect the lining of the gut. They help protect us from pathogens and so many things. They interact with our bones and our hormones, and these bacteria are absolutely amazing. And we have for every cell that we have in our body, we've probably got between 3 and 4 bacteria in the gut. We used to think it was much more than that. That's phenomenal, isn't it?
3 times the number of cells in the body.
Yeah, more. Yeah.
Wow.
So kind of just giving you a bit of context there, going back to the question, when we think about probiotic rich foods, these are obviously foods that contain certain strains of bacteria that we know naturally live in our own gut, and they may have a beneficial effect on our own microbiome. Certainly we're talking about foods, we're thinking about certain types of foods, which I'm sure we'll go into, and supplements. They certainly can be beneficial to us. The extent to which they're beneficial is very variable. We still don't know entirely. And there are a lot of health claims around probiotics that we have to be, just sort of a little bit conservative around those sometimes. But they certainly are beneficial. I can't remember the exact question.
Very open questions, so that's absolutely fine. No, I think that the other part that then confuses people, certainly was confusing me, was then you hear the word prebiotic. So what does that mean? What's the difference between probiotic and prebiotic?
Yeah, so the probiotic are the live bacteria. So we can find these in certain foods and supplements, and we can eat those, and they may not necessarily populate. I think that's really common, just to make that clear. They may not necessarily populate the gut, but they can have a beneficial effect on the gut as they pass through. The prebiotics are referring to basically the food for the bacteria. It refers to a form of carbohydrates, a class of carbohydrates known as non-starch polysaccharides that feed those bacteria, and in the process the bacteria produce really beneficial metabolites or byproducts from digesting those for us. And we can't digest the fiber, so dietary fiber we cannot digest. We don't have the enzymes to break down this specific class of carbohydrates, but our bacteria produce enzymes so they can digest it for us. And again, as I said, in the process, they make beneficial properties that are good for our health as well.
Wow, that's so interesting. So the prebiotic is like a fertilizer to help the bacteria grow, I guess, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, we are going to get into some specific examples of foods that are going to help both, right? But so I thought this would be a good time to just introduce the sauerkraut element of today's event. So we thought we'd add a little bit of that fun, because it's December, we'd get doing some stuff in the kitchen. So sauerkraut is a probiotic, isn't it, Holly?
It is a probiotic.
Why is sauerkraut good for us? Because I love it.
So as with other probiotic foods, sauerkraut is fermented cabbage. So you're basically putting the cabbage through a fermentation process. So you're adding in a certain culture, bacteria that's then munching on some of those fibers in the cabbage and producing some of the beneficial properties. So sauerkraut is a probiotic. Kimchi, kombucha, yogurt, kefir, miso, these are all probiotic foods, as in they contain some of those bacteria.
Yeah, actually, while we're on this, again, I was doing a little bit of research. Olives apparently are fermented. There's different ways of curing them, but the traditional way is fermentation. So yeah, olives as well. And especially, I think, is when they're put in brine, it creates a fermentation, an environment in which fermentation can happen. So there you go.
Definitely a good one to know. Yeah, I love olives as well.
No, same. I thought, oh, fab! I'll smack on those even more. It's a great excuse. So sauerkraut. So I also think this is a fantastic thing. I know we've all been told work from home probably a little bit more, and this is a perfect thing to try while you're working from home, and also creates kind of some nice little Christmas gifts. It's delicious, goes without saying, and it's also very good for you. And it's a fun process. I have 2 kids and they absolutely love it when we do this because they enjoy the burping process, which is what the official name for it. They love that. So I'll talk through that as well in a minute. So sauerkraut, as you say, fermented cabbage. My favourite way of doing it is using a mixture of red cabbage and white cabbage because it makes this lovely pink colour. And obviously, Vitality, we're all about pink. Got to be pink. So it's so easy. It's so easy to make your own. Now, sauerkraut in the supermarkets is actually very, very expensive. Obviously, cabbage itself, incredibly cheap, and the only ingredients you're going to need are cabbages and salt. That's it. So it couldn't be simpler, but I think one thing that puts people off a little bit is the fermentation part, possibly worrying about getting it wrong, etc. But there's 2 things really in order to make sure that doesn't happen. Cleanliness being the first one, really, really important, and the second, a really good dose of common sense when you're looking at it through the sort of fermentation stage. So what you need to do is wash your cabbage before you've chopped it. The reason we don't wash it after you've chopped it is because there's already some, you'll know this, Holly, there's already some really lovely good bacteria living within these layers. We don't want to wash all of that away. We want to keep it and give it a nice environment in which to thrive, right? But we need to make sure the outside is clean. So give it a really good wash, remove a couple of layers of leaves so that you've got the nice clean cabbage there. And then what you can do is chop it into quarters like this, and then just chop out that core into a little triangle, keep it to one side, and also keep the end. Can you see that's hang on, I'll show you the red one, might be easy to see. That's the little end of the cabbage, about a 2 centimetre slice. Chop that off and keep it to one side because you're going to need it later. Then, I feel like Blue Peter, Holly.
I feel like I'm on Saturday Kitchen.
Well, that's what we're going for. So here's what I chopped earlier. I quite like it quite finely chopped because sauerkraut's really nice, isn't it? Sort of sprinkled over salads and in sandwiches and stuff, and it's nice. But you can chop it however, whatever you fancy, really, whatever you prefer. So I've got here 800 grams of cabbage. I'm going to use this Kilner jar for it. And actually, I'm just going to reach over and grab the rubber seal. Hang on. Here we go. So these are great. You can use a different jar. The reason I quite like to use a Kilner jar is because the rubber seal helps it. I can seal it fully because the rubber seal allows a tiny bit of gas out. If you use a screw top jar, just be sure you don't tighten it because you're basically creating a bomb. Because it will, as the bacteria, so it's a living thing, it needs to breathe, it needs to release gas. So you need to sterilise your jar. So the best way I find to do that, the easiest way, is to give it a good wash in warm soapy water, pop it in your oven at about 140 degrees Celsius for about 10 minutes, basically until it's dry. Take it out, it'll be hot, let it cool down. And there you go. That's your prep. And everything must be sterilised. I don't think I mentioned that. Cleanliness is key. Wash your cabbage, sterilise your jar, but also sterilise your workstation. Make sure your hands are really nice and clean, because we want to encourage that good bacteria. We don't want to add any bad bacteria into the mix. So I've got 800 grams of cabbage here. I don't think I'll need it all. I've got another jar I can use to, if I've got leftover. Weigh your cabbage, and then all you need to do is add, so 20% of whatever that weight is, you're going to add in salt. So 20% of my cabbage was 160 grams of salt. So I've got that here. I'm going to add this into the cabbage. Basically, fermentation. You can ferment any vegetable, can't you? Really. And all you need to do it is brine. But because cabbage is so full of water, it creates its own water. So what we do, we add the salt, and we're just going to massage the cabbage, which will release the water. And you're just going to kind of squeeze it. And as you squeeze it, probably about 10 minutes or so, I reckon, you'll start to see liquid coming out. So it should create probably a good cup of water. Yeah. So while I'm massaging the cabbage, Holly.
I love it.
Oh dear. So this one in particular, this is lactic fermentation, isn't it? So this is going to create, correct me if I'm wrong, the lactobacillus bacteria. Yeah. But there are, as you said, there are loads of other types of good bacteria.
Yeah. And there are loads of other strains of there are many strains of lactobacillus as well. Most commercial food or fermentation processes will use lactic bacteria. Lactobacillus and bifidobacterium are the ones that you're going to see in those food products, and actually in a lot of supplements as well. They're found in abundance in the gut. They're very, very well studied. Lactobacillus, really interestingly, actually those lactic bacteria can actually increase lactose tolerance. So it's really interesting, isn't it?
Really?
Yeah, as long as you're eating a yogurt, for example, which obviously is dairy, can actually improve your ability to tolerate the lactose. But yes, there are many, many strains of bacteria in the gut, not just the ones that you see in your yogurt pot. Again, it's usually going to be those two strains. There are things like Akkermansia, Anaerostipes, Fusobacterium. These are really, really important strains that have very important health benefits in the gut, but you won't see these for various reasons on on yogurt pots or containers. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, sorry. So I was just going to say, because I mean, again, I'm sort of from the, I was sort of aware of, your Actimel and your other yogurt-based drinks that are sort of probiotics, etc. But we've had a question coming in actually about, we've explained the difference between prebiotics and probiotics, but what are the best sources? So we touched on some of the probiotic ones, didn't we? Along with things like fermented vegetables. You've also got yogurt. We talked about that. Kefir. Yeah.
Yes.
How about some of the prebiotic sources? What do we need to be eating in terms of that?
So that's a really good question, and often, general prebiotic foods and where prebiotics are, again, remember they're a specific form of dietary fiber. All prebiotics are dietary fiber, but not all fibers are prebiotic. So there's specific fibers that are very good for us. We tend to find, so the allium family vegetables, garlic, onions, leeks, and asparagus. These are all natural prebiotic foods that are really good to include, as often as you can. But then there are sort of specific subsets of prebiotics like galacto-oligosaccharides, which are found I know, there's many. There's fructose.
I'm so impressed that you remember all these words.
I use them on a day-to-day basis. That's why.
Still blows my mind.
Yeah, this is a specific kind of branch of prebiotics that feed bifidobacterium in particular, and they're found in legumes, so your chickpeas and your beans and your lentils, as well as oats, and actually milk. So milk contains galacto-oligosaccharides that are a prebiotic. So even milk itself feeds bifidobacterium.
Yeah.
And then there's another subset that I think is important to mention. There are others as well, and that's the resistant starches. So these are found in things like green bananas as opposed to yellow bananas, and things like cooked and cooled potatoes. So when you're cooking potatoes, the starch in them expand, but when they cool down, those starch granules contract down and they become resistant to digestion, so that they then travel through to the bowel where the bacteria are. Remember, the bacteria aren't in the small intestine, they're at the end stage of the gut.
Yeah.
And that's where they can then provide a fuel source for the bacteria. So I tend to say to clients, you know, there are many reasons why you might want to cool your potatoes down before you eat them, but you know, like a cold potato salad in the summer is a great source of resistant starch. Green bananas as well, and then some of those other foods that I mentioned as well. Those are really some of your prebiotics.
Wow, so interesting. My goodness, didn't know any of that. Fascinating. Somebody asked, does eating yogurt daily help with gut health? Particularly yogurt that's high in healthy bacteria. I guess, yeah.
I mean, you know, without knowing a lot more about the clinical picture of whether or not there are issues with, you know, dairy, or, you know, is the diet varied in other ways, then absolutely yogurt can be a very useful tool. You know, a very useful source of probiotics. I always think it's nice to vary the source. You know, have a cow's milk yogurt, and then have a goat's milk yogurt. Maybe switch it up with kefir if you don't like some of the other probiotics, just to make sure that, you know, that as much as we can vary those strains, you know, that's sort of what I would say would be a factor. But you know, yogurt can be a daily addition to the diet, and a very healthy one for sure. Yeah, it has other benefits as well.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, perfect. So there's some great questions coming through, and actually in line with quite a lot of the questions we had before, there's quite a lot of people asking about irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS. So somebody has asked, any suggestions for irritable bowel syndrome and reducing inflammation in the body?
Okay, so those are two different things.
Okay, interesting. Okay, great question.
Yeah, inflammation could be a part of the IBS picture, for sure, but also it might not be. It could be related to an organic gut disorder like IBD, or autoimmune condition or something. So I'll answer the first part of that question first. So IBS is it's a differential. Sorry, it's a diagnosis of exclusion. So you'll probably know this if you've had a diagnosis. You would have been tested for IBD, celiac disease, all sorts of other organic gut disorders, and those organic gut conditions are the ones that we have a known pathology, so we know the process of disease. Whereas in IBS, we don't really fully understand the cause of IBS. It can be multifactorial. It's often related to the gut-brain axis. There may be other triggers as well. In terms of recommendations, very, very difficult to tell you without knowing more about the case, the case, you know, you as an individual, because IBS can present in very different ways. You can have constipation IBS, diarrhea IBS, IBS, you know, a mixed picture where you've got this alternating diarrhea and constipation, or IBS which doesn't present with either of those things. So the kind of strategy, the therapeutic strategy, is going to be very different depending on how you present.
Right.
Two of the most fundamentally, you know, evidence-based therapeutics for IBS are a low FODMAP diet, which, you know, really should be done under the supervision of a dietitian or someone who has experience in low FODMAPs. It's a very, very restrictive diet. It does require you to remove a lot of very, very healthy dietary fibers for a period of time, but it can relieve symptoms while the underlying cause is addressed. And often it might not be. So often some people will think, oh, low FODMAP diet is the answer, and then find it may put them into remission, but as soon as those foods are reintroduced, you know, those symptoms recur. But nonetheless, it can be a helpful management tool. Right, yes. And then the other treatment strategy, which I really love to use before we get to that point, is actually gut-brain hypnotherapy. So we know that there's a gut-brain link, and some research trials in the recent years have shown that actually gut-brain hypnotherapy is more effective than a low FODMAP diet, and it involves, you know, certain types of breathing techniques. And there's a fantastic app called Nerva, so Nerva, which I really recommend having a look at, which is, I think it's about 20 minutes a day of this gut hypnotherapy, and it can be really, you know, it's shown to have some really beneficial effects for IBS.
Thank you so much. I'm sure that would have been really helpful to so many people, because we did have quite a lot of questions, didn't we, about IBS specifically. Okay, so I think we're going to pause. We're going to come back to the sauerkraut for a moment, because I think my massaging might be done. Somebody has asked, do you have to use your hands to massage the cabbage? Would a wooden spoon or a big mixer work? I've never done it with anything. I think you need to use your hands.
I think Jamie Oliver, get your hands in there.
Get your hands in there. If you want, I mean, it does, obviously it's making my hands a bit purple. You could wear gloves, but a mix of, I don't know, you want to keep the structure of the cabbage, you know, you don't want to lose that. I'm just going to rinse my hands off, and I'll just show you if I can. It's kind of reduced in size a little bit, and then, oh, I don't know if you can see.
Yeah, I can see.
There's a fair amount of liquid in there, purple liquid. So that's perfect. So, excuse me. So I've got my jar, my sterilised jar, and basically going to take handfuls again. Just got to get messy. Got to get messy. And pop your cabbage in, and you're going to really, really pack it down, because we don't want any air coming into the jar. We just want cabbage and the liquid. So somebody else asked, if you make other fermented vegetables, is the ratio of salt to vegetables the same as it is for cabbage? Yes, yes it is. And then it turns off with 20%. And then and you can add flavour. You can add flavouring in there. You can add other bits and pieces if you want to. Chili. Yeah. I really like the taste of fermented vegetables. Doesn't sound as nice as it is, does it? But it is delicious. So I don't normally add anything, but you can absolutely do that. And then in terms of your water, I'll show you in a moment, but you just need to make sure that absolutely all of it is completely submerged. So I'm packing it down, and I'm going to fill it to the top. Oops, I'm getting messy now, Holly.
It's great. This is what cooking's all about, and I do really feel like I'm in the kitchen. I
was going to make Holly do this along with me.
Yeah, I had internet connectivity.
No, you would have done, wouldn't you? But your connection in the kitchen isn't quite as strong as this, right?
No, we have very thick walls in this.
Anything to get out of it. No, I'm kidding.
I wanted to watch you do it, because it's great. It's great. I find it very therapeutic, actually.
Oh, okay, perfect. So I've got all my cabbage. You know, that was absolutely perfect amount of cabbage. So that's wonderful. This is about, guys, about a 700 milliliter jar. 800 grams of cabbage. So now I'm just going to tip a bit. Can you see the the lovely liquid?
Yeah, it's got all those lovely polyphenols in it. We should talk about polyphenols, actually. Yeah, they're also good for gut health.
Okay, we will talk about that. So I've just topped it up. Gosh, I'm dripping purple juice. So that all of it is underneath the water. You want to fill it right to the top, and then this is where these little bits of cabbage come in really handy, the end that we saved, because what we want to do is pop that in the top, just to make sure, can you see? Just to make sure that when I close it, absolutely everything is underwater. We don't want any of it exposed to any air. And then have a good look and just make sure that there's no air pockets or anything like that, which it looks like there isn't. It's all nice and nicely done. So I haven't got one with me, but what I recommend you do is pop it in like a like a pasta bowl, like a shallow bowl, because even just overnight, you will see activity, and there probably will be a little bit of leakage. So I'm just going to pop the lid on, seal it up, and there you go. There's your sauerkraut, all ready to go. If you need to stop any further the top, you can use a bit of your cabbage that you saved, like I said, but I've got a nice sort of, it's nice and packed in tightly, which is good. So what you're going to do then is pop it somewhere. I normally pop mine in the cupboard, simply because it doesn't need to be in the dark, but it's just that it needs to be a regulated temperature. So definitely away from sunlight, windowsills, etc. So a cupboard, 20 degrees, perfect temperature really, for it to thrive. So I pop it in that cupboard over there in a bowl though, because you might see some leakage. And then very importantly, what you need to do over the next 1 to 2 weeks, basically, is burp it every day. So you need to lift the lid, open the lid so carefully over the sink, away from you, not wearing a white jumper, because it will get excited. And you're just going to release the gas. You release the gas, pop it back to bed in the cupboard for another day. So every day you need to do that, just release the gas. I tend to do mine for about 10 days. Some people like to leave it a little bit longer. Basically, the longer you leave it, the more of that kind of lovely fermented flavour you get. But 7 days is fine. This is why it's good for working from home, Holly, because obviously you need to be around every day. You can't make this and then just leave it. It will explode.
Yeah, same with kefir.
Yeah, there you go. Same with sourdough. If anyone did a sourdough starter over lockdown, it's the same sort of thing. So similarly with that, if you are going away, pop it in the fridge. So anyway, once you're happy with the flavour, you can pop it in your fridge. It slows it right down, and then you can enjoy it for, they say 3 months. Mine's lasted a little bit longer in the past. Use your common sense. And what you're looking for when you burp it, really importantly, can't show you now unfortunately, but you'll see lots of lovely activity on the top. So it'll be, what you're looking for is bubbles. You're looking for bubbles. It might have a smell, which is, as my children like to say, it smells a bit of farts. Sorry to use that word, but that's a good thing. It's all working. What you don't want to see is any mold, and I think we all know what mold looks like. So anything kind of like furry, fluffy, or yeast. So I mean, yeast won't hurt you, obviously, it won't hurt you, but it will alter the flavour. So if I were to see yeast, I'd probably start again, to be honest. But yeast looks a bit like spider webby, or it'll look like it's got a bit of a film on top. So you shouldn't see that. You should just see bubbles. So there you go. And the great thing, one thing I haven't mentioned actually in terms of the flavour, is that the great thing about fermented foods, if anyone's vegetarian or vegan, I'm not personally, but I don't eat a ton of meat. It has that umami flavour, which is that really deep savoury flavour that you get in meat and cheese, that if you're cutting that out of your diet, you really do miss. So this is a great way of adding it back in. So there we go. Someone said, what happens if the cabbage is exposed to air? Any room for anything else to get in is just not good. It all needs to be submerged. So just make sure of that. There we go. So if you have any other questions about sauerkraut, we can come back to it, pop them in the chat, and I can answer those, or Holly can answer too. So now on to some more gut health stuff. Another thing that came up a lot, Holly, and I know this is actually an area of specialism for you because you do a lot of work with women, don't you, in hormones. And I think something I read was around the fact that women actually experience more gut symptoms, digestive symptoms than men on average, and apparently it's something to do with hormones. Would you say that's true? And how can we kind of manage those symptoms, particularly at certain times of the month?
Yeah, so I certainly would say it wouldn't be surprised me at all, and I think women unfortunately will be more susceptible to hormone-related gut issues. So there are a number of reasons for this. So if we think about firstly a cycling woman, so a premenopausal woman who's experiencing a monthly cycle, she's going to experience changes in estrogen and progesterone levels, these two hormones, other hormones as well, but those two hormones that can have a big impact on the gut. Progesterone is the hormone that's produced after ovulation, so between ovulation and your bleed, in the luteal phase. Progesterone is responsible for keeping the lining of the endometrium intact, and one of the other roles it plays is actually to relax the smooth muscles in the uterus, to stop it from contracting. So for example, if you were going to get pregnant in this period, it's trying to calm everything down. And some of those effects, that relaxation of the smooth muscle, can also affect the guts, and the relaxation of the smooth muscle there can actually lead to reduced motility and constipation. In certain individuals, not in everyone, but certain women will feel that, and that could then contribute to bloating before the period and that sort of lead up towards the period. During a period itself, we produce a lot of what we call prostaglandins, which are hormone-like chemicals that are released by the lining of the endometrium, again in response to a fall in progesterone. And these are natural inflammatory biochemicals that help the lining of the endometrium shed. So the endometrium doesn't just shed on its own. It needs to be triggered. It needs to be triggered, and in order to shed. And these, for want of a better word. And the prostaglandins also can get into the bloodstream and get to nearby tissues, including the gut and the back and the muscles. They can cause pain, lower back pain, and also abdominal cramping and discomfort, and also trigger loose stools, so what we call period poops, where we get a kind of diarrhea around that time. So the interaction and the interplay between hormones and the gut that's just one. There's many others. Estrogen itself, low levels of estrogen, which you may experience in menopause, postpartum, immediately after having a baby, estrogen levels plummet, and that can cause increase in intestinal hyperpermeability. So the lining of the gut can become more permeable. Estrogen is this amazing hormone that helps to plump out all these tissues and keep them, really healthy. So low levels of estrogen can also cause issues. And there are other sort of reasons as well. But yes, 100%, our hormones are going to cause gut symptoms for sure.
Yeah, so it's very normal. All those symptoms that we all experience around that time of the month, very, very normal. We've put through a lot, aren't we? So, Holly, there are so many questions coming through. Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. We're going to try and we've got sort of 20 minutes left, if that's okay with you, Holly. We'll keep going. We'll get through as many as we can. So let me have a little look.
Go for it.
So
I'll try and
someone said we talk a lot about how to avoid bloating, but is there anything you can eat or drink to reduce symptoms when you actually have them? So when you are feeling really, really bloated, is there anything you can do to relieve that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, again, or unhelpfully, it does depend on the cause of the bloating. The bloating might not be related to gut, actually. It could be related to hormones. It could be related to anatomical changes, changes in, the musculature of the abdominal wall, pelvic floor. There's lots of causes of bloating, but let's say it is related to foods that we're eating or the manner in which we're eating. Foods that could be helpful would be things like peppermint, it's not really a food, but peppermint tea. Peppermint oil is better, so peppermint oil capsules, 30 to 60 minutes before meals can reduce spasms in the gut that can help to help relieve gas and reduce bloating. Ginger is a natural prokinetic, so if the bloating is as a consequence of something like constipation and there are gut motility issues, then ginger, fresh ginger though, as opposed to a tea, probably better, because you can crush up the ginger, add it to some hot water, will release all of those phytonutrients in the ginger oil that can be naturally anti-inflammatory and prokinetic as well. Those would be two ones I would suggest. But again, if it's related to constipation, then I'd be thinking about things like using psyllium husks or flax seeds daily can be helpful. Prunes, kiwi fruits can help that. But again, don't discount the kind of lifestyle stuff too. I think bloating is one of those things where it happens to all of us from time to time, and bloating, a little bit of bloating is a natural part of eating, so we tend to not want to see it. But if we've eaten a large meal especially, or a meal high in fiber, it's pretty natural to have a little bit of bloating. But even just, I know it's really unsexy to say this, but just slowing down and eating, chewing your food well and trying to eat in a relaxed environment, doing some deep breaths before you eat, or so a little bit of movement after you eat to help with digestion, that can be helpful.
It's really interesting to hear you say about sort of using fresh ginger rather than ginger tea, for example, or peppermint oil you mentioned. Excuse me, sorry, because I'm a big drinker of peppermint tea, but I've never thought of using the oil instead, but I guess it's just more potent, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And also, if you're taking them in capsules, then that's going to make sure that it gets through to the bowel, where we want those peppermint polyphenols and phytonutrients to be released, and then have that effect, that antispasmodic effect in the wall of the gut. Whereas peppermint tea, there's nothing wrong with it, and certainly we don't have a lot of research on around the benefits. It doesn't have so many benefits, but there's nothing wrong with it, and it can only be a good thing, to have a nice sort of hydrating drink that's warming and comforting, tastes nice, and has a bit of peppermint in it as well. So by all means, go with the tea too. Yeah.
Oh, great. I should keep my peppermint tea habit then. There are some amazing questions. We've just had a really good question come through. Someone's asked, is colon cleansing or colonic irrigation a good way of keeping your gut healthy?
No.
Blanket no from Molly there. Why not? How interesting.
Okay, well, let's just say in a certain scenario, let's say there's a severe case of dysbiosis, or a very severe medical condition where microbial transplants have actually been done, and they're used in certain situations. But no, I don't think personally, I don't think cleansing out, taking out all of your, wiping out bacteria, that's not natural. I don't think. I think it's a very, it's like a lot of these. There are a lot of. I'm personally very anti that, but that's, I'm usually also very conservative and very open to different types of therapies and treatments. But when it comes to, shoving water up your anus and stuff, I just don't think that, I can't see how that nature intended that to be helpful for our gut health, unless again there is a very, very specific severe condition which requires a treatment that way, or a colonic, some form of a colonic edema or something. But generally speaking, no, I would just say, just don't do that.
Good to know. Thank you, Holly. It sounds absolutely totally sensible. Talking about chronic conditions and that kind of thing, we did have quite a few questions, didn't we, before the discussion around certain questions for certain conditions, for example, ulcerative colitis, those sort of conditions that are going to be diagnosed. And we've had one come in, somebody has a condition called bile acid malabsorption, which is all about the body produces too much and cannot absorb the volume of bile acid. I mean, I don't know whether we might be able to help with this question. This one says, I struggle to find foods that are not too acidic, and the FODMAP hasn't worked for me. Any suggestions of food that will help with bile absorption?
I think bile, if you do have a diagnosed condition such as, you know, a gallbladder issue or bile acid malabsorption, I think the first place is to speak to your doctor. You do need to seek medical treatment first. And again, because of the nature of the condition, it 100% can be aided by a nutritionist, certain foods and lifestyle, but there would be, I can't safely give a recommendation in that scenario without really knowing, because there would be contraindications to certain things I might suggest. So I'm very sorry for that one. I think I don't want to give an answer.
Absolutely, and I think we just wanted to address that in general. Actually, there were quite a few very specific personal questions about certain conditions or symptoms, and I think the overall message from Holly and I is to make sure that you speak, if you've got a diagnosed condition, speak to your specialist about it, speak to your doctor. If you haven't been diagnosed with anything, then do speak to your GP. If you're a Vitality member, you've got the Vitality GP service. You can go and book an online appointment and have a quick chat to discuss any symptoms that you're experiencing personally. That's probably best, isn't it? Because everyone's different, right, Holly?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's always a good place to start with your doctor, and then you know, you have a diagnosis, then working with a dietitian, a registered nutritionist, or another health professional is very helpful in that case, because then you know, I do a lot of testing myself. Sometimes I'm referring back to a GP to do certain other tests, but I do a lot of gut tests, so I certainly can help with that. But I do think that I always think it's best to start with the doctor, because just for so many reasons it's good, you know.
Absolutely, excellent. So, I mean, another question that came through was, can you recommend any books or blogs or online resources to help understand the impact of the gut on my body? Have you got any good recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many, and also just be aware with any books and things. Often books, people are trying to sell you something, so just be careful with the books. And often there's a lot of diet books out there, and you know, talking about gut health protocols and things like that. So I'd be mindful of some of those. But Tim Spector, so if you look up Tim Spector, he is a leading professor, researcher in this field, and he's written books. He's got, you know, he's been on YouTube. I think he may have a channel. I don't not. He's definitely been on, you know, he'll be all sorts of media. So if you look up any kind of literature or other media that features him, is absolutely fantastic. Other books, I mean, I loved Juliet Enders's Gut. I think that's a very kind of user-friendly, interesting kind of sort of overview of some of the, you know, health, the implications of gut in terms of our health. There's a book called Rewire Your Gut by a registered dietitian in the US called Erin Kenny, who is actually, I love her. I know her very well. She's really great, and you know, obviously from a kind of nutrition point of view, she will go into some of this stuff as well. So I like that book too. But Tim Spector would be my kind of go-to for everything related to the microbiome and the gut, and the influence of the gut on our health.
Oh, great, thank you for that. The other one, just to add one in the mix, and I hope you approve of this, Holly, you can maybe have a little look afterwards, but if anyone's on Instagram, if you're the kind of person that likes to digest things in social media form, nice bite-sized pieces, there is a brilliant, quite large Instagram account called the Gut Stuff. I think it's just at the Gut Stuff, and it's two sisters who are nutritionists, and they share it in such lovely mini digestible, you know, snippets.
Bite-sized,
yeah, bite-sized. And by the way, everyone should also follow Holly. What's your Instagram handle?
Yeah, it's really funny because I've got a post coming out today on bloating, so feel free to go and read all of them.
Everyone go and follow Holly.
That wasn't intentional. It just happened on the same day. Holly Dunn Nutrition. Yeah, so
Holly Dunn Nutrition. Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to have another little look through. Well, I think we'll take maybe one or two more, if that's okay. Is that all right with you, Holly?
Yeah, that's okay.
Somebody said, is fasting good for us? That's sort of a general nutrition question. What do you think about fasting?
I think there's a gut link here too. I do think that's a really, really good question. And certainly for our gut health, you know, giving your gut, if you were going to go through, if I was going to give you my top kind of 6, 7, 8 tips for gut health, resting your gut would be on there. And you know, generally speaking, it is a good idea to rest the gut, but this happens naturally overnight. So I think as long as we're leaving a 12-hour gap between dinner and breakfast, we give our gut a chance to rest. That activates something called the migrating motor complex, which helps to clean out and sweep out the gut, and can, you know, reduce your risk of developing things like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and other dysbiosis and complications. So when it comes to intermittent fasting, which is where we leave an extended gap, you know, and we're actually only eating within a smaller window in the day, I think the research around this has shown that it can be effective in sedentary populations, usually male subjects. That all the research has been done in men or postmenopausal women. When it comes to women who are premenopausal with you know, hormones and cycling, and I don't recommend it because of the impact on cortisol. It has a knock-on impact to reproductive hormones. It can actually cause thyroid issues and, you know, downregulate your metabolism. So it really depends who you are. Some people might get on really well with it, but I often find that they may get on well with it for a period of weeks, and then they start to experience, you know, higher levels of anxiety, chronic kind of fatigue type pictures. So I think it does depend on the individual, but I would say ideally not if you're a woman and you're premenopausal, but, you know, there may be certain situations where it does work for you.
Really interesting, thank you. I hope that answered your question. So I think last one, and maybe let's bring it back to the sauerkraut, because somebody has asked, is it possible to eat too much, too many probiotic foods? Is it a case of with everything in moderation, or you know, can anything nasty happen if you consume too much?
Probiotics or prebiotics?
Probiotics, or both.
Yeah. I mean, like with everything, I think everything in moderation. If you were just eating probiotics, then yeah, you wouldn't be getting all of the other nutrients that you need from your diet, because probiotic-rich foods are only, you know, usually a certain group of foods. So I would say it only would be a real issue if you had dysbiosis or something like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, where probiotics are actually contraindicated in that case, because you've got more bacteria in the small intestine and you don't really want to sort of feed any issues there by adding more bacteria in. But that's a very, very exceptional scenario. I would say you should, you know, most of us can enjoy probiotics daily and should be enjoying them daily. But prebiotic rich foods, I think, you know, obviously if you're eating excessive amounts of any high fiber foods, you might experience bloating or higher amounts of gas, because these foods are they're very voluminous. They contain a lot of water, a lot of fiber, and so we do want to balance out our foods with, you know, proteins and carbohydrates and fats and everything really, and have these foods in again daily, but not necessarily, you know, again, it just comes back to that moderation. I'm sure we could all eat too much of anything.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. Thank you. I'm looking at the time. I can squeeze one more question. There are just so many, and I don't want anyone to feel like we haven't answered. Thank you, by the way, everyone, for all of your questions. And if we can get back to you on any of these, we will try our best. I'm sure Holly wouldn't mind if you reached out. If you wanted to follow her on Instagram,
I'm sure we can squeeze two more.
Squeeze a couple more in. Somebody said, any foods to avoid or add for gastritis?
Oh, so a gastritis is, you know, obviously an acute inflammatory condition that's usually an infection. It's usually caused by some form of an infection or a food poisoning. It can also be related to, you know, a stress. It can be a stress spasmodic problem as well. But yeah, if you've had food poisoning, you really want to go easy on all prebiotics, all high fiber rich foods. Gentle approach, things that are easily digestible. So, you know, rice, eggs if you tolerate them, toast, you know, go for the white bread as opposed to the brown bread, just because it's more easily to digest. With things like Marmite, again, B vitamins, you know, because you're going to really struggle to eat the volume. So just be really gentle, lots of fluids, and, you know, as much as you can tolerate, but just be careful there as well. Ginger can actually be an anti-nausea, so it can be quite gentle in that scenario. I mean, it's very much a question of recovery and then repopulating. As I said, you know, if you've been ill or you've had to have antibiotics, you know, I wouldn't be going down probiotic foods and prebiotic rich foods and that. I just take all of that to a side for a bit and just think about, you know, what's going to cause the least trauma to the gut, and what's going to be just really, really easy for you to digest. You're not going to want to eat a lot of food anyway, so what can we get in that gives energy and glucose to the brain and the body in a even electrolyte drinks and things like that, what could be helpful.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, I think we will wrap it up there, Holly. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. It has been amazing. I can't believe how many questions we've got through, how much you've managed to share. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I've learned so much.
Oh, thank you. Well, I've also learned from watching you. I've loved, the tutorial. So I'm going to go away and make my sauerkraut now.
Oh yeah, I do hope you will. There'll be your Christmas gift sorted. I was just thinking, actually, 2 weeks to ferment. It's perfect timing, isn't it, for Christmas? So if anybody gives it a go, do follow the Vitality Instagram account as well, Vitality in UK, or any of our other social channels. If you give it a go, tweet us a message or send us a pic on Instagram or something. We'd love to see, absolutely love to see. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining and for all of your wonderful questions. You will, when we end the webinar, you'll be asked to submit some feedback if you'd like to, and we really, really appreciate your feedback. This event actually was put on as a response to people saying, please, can we have some more nutrition events? So we do listen, we really value your feedback, and we can't wait to read it. So thank you, everyone. Don't forget to have a look in the handout section to see about the events we've got going on for the rest of the month, which actually we finish next Friday. We've got 3 next week, and they all touch on, I think we've got one on physical activity, one on nutrition, and one on mental health. So make sure you sign up for those, and we will see you soon. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Juliet. Thank you. Bye. Bye.